I think we can get on with our introductory part of our session. So let me say, first of all, huge welcome to our webinar today, focusing on the takeaways from the latest in our series of global research reports here at Profit, where we focused on the topic of collaboration and how collaboration at its very best can unlock resilience in challenging times. I'm delighted to be here with my co-authors. So I'm Helen Rosethorn, Senior Partner in the Organisation and Culture Practice here at Profit, and I'm joined by Tony Frost, who's the Organisation and Culture Practice Lead, Amanda, another specialist partner within a practice, Christine Brandt-Jones, who's Senior Partner leading our Insight and Analytics team globally, and Erin Myers, Engagement Manager, who's been very much at the heart of this research effort. And we have Alexis in the background supporting us, making sure all our tech and activity in the hour ahead goes according to plan. So for those who don't know much about Profit, let me just take a couple of moments to explain a little bit about us. We're a consulting firm focused on transformation and growth, and we really exist. Our mission is to help clients unlock uncommon growth. And what is uncommon growth? Well, we talk about it as the growth that surprises competitors, delights consumers, and fuels leaders to sustain the growth journey and the growth mindset that comes with this. And it's a growth thing it's a growth perspective that's rich with possibilities. It's not just relevant for the here and now, but it's absolutely relevant for the tomorrow that we're navigating, which again, in our context of collaboration in challenging times, feels very pertinent. In our firm, we focus on 4 key growth levers across the practice areas of marketing and sales, brand and activation, experience and innovation, and organisation and culture, where, as you can see, you've got part of the leadership team of that practice on this webinar with you now. We're interdisciplinary. We work across those platforms, and we have key competencies across strategy, insight and analytics, digital, tech, design and verbal. But as I said, you've got the O&C team in particular here. So selfishly, let me tell you a little bit more about what we seek to help our clients solve in their search for uncommon growth. And you'll identify, I'm sure, with a number of these themes so pertinent in the world today around purpose, around navigating a VUCA world and building resilience and having the right capabilities, and also ensuring that you can continue to thrive on change and through change. We can go to the next slide. This is particularly how we think about our mission in the organisation and culture practice, where we connect our pursuit of uncommon growth with unlocking the full potential of human-centred organisations. And by that, we mean that at the end of the day, it's not businesses that change, it's people who change, and it's people who then change your business. So we help organisations think about themselves as a macrocosm of the individual, but more about that in due course. So what are we going to cover today? We're going to talk to content across the 3 main pieces. We're going to talk about culture as a growth catalyst and how it is more relevant than ever, and how we built towards this year's research and how it connects to the journey of the Catalyst research reports over the last few years. Then we'll share with you what's come from that collaboration examination, and then we'll dive into a detailed client story, bringing to life what we've learned and hopefully illustrating, if you want, these research findings in action. And we'd be very welcoming throughout of questions, which we will try and answer as we go along, but also reserve some time at the end of the session for those as well. There is a chat function in Zoom webinar, which we would love you to use. Yes, you may see a Q&A button, but we find it's probably best if we're all working in the chat facility. So please look for that. Be happy at any time to drop questions in and we'll deal with them, as I said, both as we go along and at the end of the session. And we want your participation and we want to hear your reaction to what we're covering. So do dive in. So let's first of all learn a bit more about those who have joined us. So we're just going to do a couple of quick poll questions because that helps us all understand who's in our virtual room today. So if you wouldn't mind sharing where you sit in your organisation in terms of function, or are you sitting in operations? It would just help us to understand, as I said, the context in which you're perhaps thinking about this topic today. So we've got quite a few answers popping through. I think we're nearly there. So we can see, interestingly, a mix across marketing and strategy slightly ahead, and digital too, a great mix. A mix that we are often working with in our client context. So that feels very pertinent today. Super. Okay, that's helpful. And my second question, in terms of the demographics of this group, is the size of your organisation. So if you wouldn't mind also sharing that, that would be good to learn. So we've got quite a spread there emerging. Some smaller to medium size, but a couple of larger too. So great, very useful to understand. Thank you. Thanks for sharing that. And I'll now hand over to Amanda, who's going to jump into the first chunk of our content to share. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Helen. So we're here today to talk about effective collaboration, but that really starts with strong culture. So as Helen mentioned, our organization and culture practice works with our clients to strengthen their cultures and really unlock the potential of their organizations to drive uncommon growth. But we've seen that as the macro environment continues to be volatile, unpredictable, and really demand organizations to change in an accelerated way, the idea of culture serving as a catalyst for growth has become more relevant than ever. So specifically, oftentimes when we come in to work with clients, it's because their transformation efforts have struggled to gain traction. And that might be due to any number of reasons, believing that there's a silver bullet. So that might be rushing to technology as a priority or overemphasis on what's new and shiny. It might be failing to invest in really aligning leadership, especially middle management. We know it's a vast group, one that can be time consuming to engage and therefore difficult for organizations to really reach out and connect with that group. Or it might be fixating on the barriers and challenges associated with change rather than finding and celebrating small wins along the way. So these patterns that we tend to see in organizations also tend to lead to a host of issues and typically a common outcome, which is unfortunately that nothing changes. So as we think about how to really drive sustained change with our clients, we've developed a model that really grounds our work and our thinking in organization and culture. So this is what we call our human-centered transformation model, which is based on the premise that organizations are made up of many humans. So therefore, like a human, they have DNA, they have a soul, they have a mind, and they have a body. And all of these elements together comprise your organization's culture and have to work in sync in order to really drive sustained change. So DNA, this is who your organization is at the core. It's your purpose, your values, your business strategy, your brand strategy. Together, these really set the direction of travel for the change to be made. The soul, this is about the mindsets and behaviors that are required for change and how these are reinforced through the day-to-day environment in a way that really ignites belief among employees. The mind, this is where we think about supercharging the workforce. So what are the capabilities that are required to really drive change, and how do we attract and develop and retain talent in the way that elevates the overall organizational capability? And then finally, within the body, this is where we organize and employees really direct the change through operating model, things like the processes, the systems, the tools that we collectively use. And so over the past 4 years, we have continued to further validate this model and really gain a deeper understanding of human-centered transformation through global culture research, what we call our Catalyst series. And it's intended to build on the findings from year to year to really gain deeper insight. So where did we start? Back in 2019, we identified what we called our catalysts. These are the key cultural levers that leaders are using to drive transformation. We identified 6 fundamentals, the essentials, the table stakes of change, things like pushing decision rights downward. And we also identified 5 accelerators, things like recognizing and rewarding progress, not just outcomes. In 2020, we then went deeper on these levers to really put together an actionable playbook for how leaders might apply them, and also answer an important question, which is, with that model that we shared on the prior page, where do I start? Where should I really focus to address my organization's key cultural barriers? In 2021, given the tremendous change that we had all been experiencing in the world, we wanted to introduce a model to really increase organizations' change fitness. So moving from a more traditional to a more transformational approach to change management really required to thrive in a volatile and unpredictable environment. And so this model intends to help organizations, teams, leaders, and individuals really move from seeing change as a threat to something where change is positive and creates growth and new opportunities. And then bringing us to this year, 2022, we saw that the environment was continuing to require companies to adapt at an accelerated rate around issues of increasing complexity. And we believe that, organizations and leaders can only thrive when working well together. And so this raised the imperative for us to really understand, why, if cross-organizational collaboration is so critical, has it been something that organizations have really struggled to do effectively over time? So we wanted to uncover the drivers of effective collaboration. So with that, this year we set out to address 4 key questions. 1, what does it take to achieve effective cross-organizational collaboration? 2, what are the implications of a hybrid work environment, how that might impact collaboration? 3, what are the barriers that are holding organizations back? And then 4, what might be gained both organizationally and personally if we're able to get cross-organizational collaboration right? So we're really excited to share the findings with all of you. Just before we do that, though, we'd love to get a sense and hear from you more in terms of how your organization is oriented around cross-organizational collaboration today. So we have just launched our first poll question, which is, which of these best describes what degree your company collaborates in a cross-organizational way? Would you say it's on most, all tasks? Is it sometimes, or we don't typically work this way, but we should? Looks like we nearly have all of our responses in. Okay, maybe if we can close the poll. It's interesting, we're seeing, most companies find themselves in the middle. They work this way sometimes with about an even split on either side. Relative to our findings, we actually found, 45% of companies said that they work this way on most or all tasks, and then another 35% working this way sometimes. So some similarities within this group. However, it's also important to understand, to what degree does your organization really value cross-organizational collaboration? So that's our next poll question. So how much would you say your company encourages and values cross-organizational collaboration? Is it a lot, a little, does not value or encourage much, or really does not value or encourage it at all? Maybe give another 5 seconds or so before we end the poll. Yep, if we can end the poll and share the results. Great. So you'll see 75% of this group says that their organization values and encourages it a lot. This is even actually stronger than what we saw in our research. We saw 45% of organizations said a lot, another 42% a little. So, definitely a lean into organizations really valuing and encouraging cross-organizational collaboration, yet struggling to get it right. And so we'd love to now go into the findings in terms of how can you really increase the overall effectiveness and impact of your cross-organizational collaboration. So I'm going to turn it to Christine to take you through the methodology.
Great, thanks, Amanda. All right, so for the methodology and sample on our study, we spoke to a wide range of people across a wide range of companies. We began our exploration with more of a qualitative approach. We talked to 20+ executives across a number of different industries, functional roles, and transformational maturity to get a deeper understanding of the dynamics around collaboration and to lay the groundwork and the language that we put into our quantitative survey, which we designed to be taken by over 1,000 respondents in the US, the UK, Germany, China, Singapore, and Vietnam. And these respondents, the 1,000, were across a range of small to large companies, across a number of different industries, as you can see on the slide, and a number of different levels in the organization, starting in the C-suite all the way through to managers who are responsible for managing others. And that group of managers is new to our Catalyst work this year. We decided to include them because they were really central to the whole notion of collaboration being multidisciplinary and multi-level. So that's our sample. And when we look at a high level, our first insight into collaboration is, first of all, that it is widely and almost universally valued. We see that firms and individuals alike value collaboration and are generally encouraged to participate in collaborative efforts inside their organizations. The benefits of collaboration are seen, first of all, as imbuing the organizations with resilience, and collaboration indeed got many firms through the pandemic and is recognized as building resilience to the point where it really helps firms through times of change, potentially including a potential economic downturn. It also creates an environment of psychological safety for the individuals who participate. It encourages people to effectively challenge the status quo, because when you collaborate together with peers where you are able to bridge both levels and functions, you create an environment of mutual respect and to some extent accountability to do that challenging in a way that is inclusive of, again, levels and functions. So you build that trust and confidence that your ideas are going to be heard and that they are valued. So we see folks reporting that when they're in a collaborative scenario, they're able to create new solutions, even in potentially constrained environments, under difficult situations, or potentially, again, when the economics of the business are under some duress. And then finally, the impact on the business is seen as pronounced. Our respondents report higher productivity, achievement of strategic goals, and on the people side, on the human side, higher employee satisfaction and higher employee retention. So collaboration turns out to be a win-win, both for the businesses, for the business and the individuals that participate in it. And then when we think about the impact of collaboration, we see that has benefits for the organization and the people in it, as I said. And the first thing that we looked at was just very simply, how are people collaborating? And we looked at broadly 3 broad modes of collaboration. And the first thing that we see is that we're not exactly hitting it out of the park in any particular mode. So there's opportunity for improvement across the board. I think there's a lot of focus right now on hybrid and working remotely, but even if you look at working in the same room, which arguably people have been doing for centuries now, we still haven't gotten that completely right. Still some opportunity to improve, bring in new tools, continue to modernize, and continue to think about how we're engaging collaboratively, even in that tried and true method. And then when we look at both of the new forms of collaboration, some of it was had some traction already, hybrid and working remotely arguably was done to some extent before the pandemic. But then once the pandemic hit, they were pretty much thrust upon all of us. We were all challenged to work at least remotely and potentially hybrid. And you could see that people want to and strive to work collaboratively, even under difficult circumstances. And we're able to adapt to these new scenarios and continue to be productive and collaborative despite the challenges that were imposed. And you can see also that both remote and hybrid, about 30% of people saying, hey, this seems to work okay. Neither one at this point we would conclude is a winner over the other. They're both to some extent seen as effective. So despite this tremendous disruption, people continue to value and desire collaborative exchanges with colleagues, and will find sometimes highly creative ways of making it work. So in the end, organizations need to continue to find ways to enable and improve these opportunities to collaborate for employees, as it clearly benefits both the organization and the folks in it. And so just wondering what you all think. It's a very hot topic right now, these methods and modes that we're all operating in, and would love to have to hear in the chat what you all have on your minds.
I also noticed one raised hand. Michelle, would you like to offer a question?
In the Q&A, she says the chat is disabled.
That is a question for Alexis, I think. Alexis, if we can.
We'll look into the chat. In the meantime, I would suggest put your thoughts or questions into the Q&A, because it seems the Q&A is working. So
yeah, and we can address them as we go through the remainder. This topic will come up a little bit throughout. And actually, I'm going to turn it over to Erin Myers, who's going to go deeper into the value and impact of collaboration and the findings that we have.
Excellent. Happy to do so. So, building off that last point that Christine sort of started with, of there's opportunity across all three modes. We got into this research, what we really wanted to be able to deliver and put out into the market is a way to help leaders in their organizations take steps to improve and build their collaborative muscle. So what we thought at the beginning of the research we might have to do is have like different drivers depending on the way you're working, whether it's in person or hybrid or remote, synchronous, asynchronous, you name the term. We thought we might have to cut it that way. And actually what our research revealed is the top drivers across these different modes and environments of working are actually pretty similar. And so what we're really excited to share is this collaboration flywheel, which is a model that helps reveal a path for leaders and their organizations, as I mentioned, to prioritize and accelerate their efforts to build a collaborative muscle, regardless of how they're currently working or how they'll work in the future. And we really like this metaphor of a flywheel, because it really helps capture, we believe, some of that inherent complexity of an adaptive system that is an organization made up of people who are complex, but also operating, as Amanda hit on, in an increasingly complex environment. And so the way a flywheel really works, right, is by reinforcing the positive behaviors, minimizing some of those negative feedback loops, and building momentum over time. And so what we found, primarily in our qualitative research, is we were able to get underneath and really understand what's going on within different organizations. The most effective organizations tend to progress their understanding of collaboration over time and through experience. What our quantitative research helped add to that is that this progressive understanding takes place in three phases. And that's what you're looking at over here in this diagram: coordination, cooperation, and collaboration. And each of these really pave the way for success in the next phase and ultimately accelerate the ability to effectively collaborate across an organization. It's a little bit different from a maturity model in that way, that you're not just sort of taking the next step and staying. You're constantly moving through these and helping build momentum and muscle, if you will, to accelerate that flywheel. The last bit on this page, as you may notice, if you squint a little bit, there are icons that sort of harken back to that human-centered transformation model Amanda introduced us to. And so, in our effort to give an actionable, pragmatic recommendation to leaders of how might you build muscle to be effectively collaborative across the organization, we find that they tie across our human-centered transformation model. And so each phase is about 3 to 4 drivers that go across DNA, mind, body, and soul to help build the relevant muscle and move through the flywheel. So the next couple of pages, I'm happy to reveal what those drivers are and share some really pragmatic, actionable examples, if you will, of what we've heard, some of our interviewees share that they've done in their organizations and what we've learned from working, on the ground with clients. So phase 1, coordination. This is where many organizations begin and unfortunately end their development journey when it comes to collaboration. So this begins when traditionally siloed groups or individuals across an organization find a reason to work horizontally rather than vertically. So at this point, leaders are, role modeling and promoting, saying, hey, working collaboratively, like this is a good idea. This will bring us farther than if we were to do it the way we've always done things. And so when these individuals are, aligned under a broader strategic goal, it can begin to plant the seed for collaboration. And so here, you see that teams are able to understand where to collaborate, how to contribute. You're just starting to set the groundwork to, again, enable some of those more detailed processes. So if you look at the drivers, we see a lot of soul and DNA. It's a lot about direction setting and role modeling at this phase to say, it's okay, and we're going to try this new way of working. A build on this is some of these ideas for examples in practice. So the drivers are great, but they're kind of theoretical. How might we bring it down one more level for how we can apply it to our own teams and our own organizations? I'll just highlight a couple, but feel free to scan and drop any questions in the Q&A. So the third one is interesting to me, which is creating a shared vocabulary. This is something I know I've used a lot with client teams when we are integrating and working in Agile. There are a lot of terms that maybe I take for granted at times, and they're really familiar with me, but to integrate with a client team, just setting that expectation of when we say blank, we mean other blank, it just helps, facilitate conversation and ensure everyone's on the same page. The fourth piece I think is really important to what Christine was hitting on about psychological safety from the outset. So defining success by certainly like what you're trying to achieve, but also what you're hoping to learn along the way, I think is really important, like I said, from the outset, to make individuals feel comfortable, to take a risk, to try this new way of working. It's going to be clunky. It might be flawless, but it sort of allows that room for, error and taking a little bit longer rather than building that in at the end. So by gaining this clear understanding of how an individual's work fits into the bigger picture, and we learn how to coordinate our efforts and why, functional groups create the potential to what we say is cooperate. And again, unfortunately, not all are seizing the opportunity, but here's how you might. Cooperation is the phase that really requires a lot of trust, which we started to build with that last example in coordination. It requires trust, it requires clarity, shared ways of working, and the right incentives. So here you see bringing in some of those body and mind elements to really embed these new ways of working. These groups need to understand their collective capabilities, but also their gaps. And that will help more clearly and effectively define roles, understand decision-making processes and rights, if you will. And this really lays the groundwork for the who and the how of the collaborative effort. And so once we have, a shared ambition, common fact base, we understand our capabilities, we know how we're going to work together, participants are now able to perceive the value of this shared effort, and they're going to have the right tools to do it. So the work is growing, a little bit in their ability to navigate complexity, but also becoming more interdependent. And so all of this taken together really means that cooperation is far more likely to have a collective impact than straightforward coordination or, traditionally siloed work will. And like I mentioned, with those body and mind drivers coming in of embedding the work, it may depend less and less on that role modeling and championing from a single senior leader and become a little bit more common or natural to those involved in the effort. A couple of examples here. I will pick the fourth one. So about breaking down collaborative efforts into manageable parts and having one individual accountable for each. That's a way to help with role clarity, right? So once you understand people's strengths, weaknesses, interests, collective capabilities of the groups, that's one way to help understand who might own what and help clarify those roles. The last one I think is also particularly interesting about building transferable skills so employees can move more fluidly across the organization. I think this is really delivering on the driver that is the third one on the mind, which is how the organization can commit to building the necessary capabilities, opportunities to shadow, observe, and just immerse in other parts of the organization that you may otherwise be separate from, ends up being really, really helpful in being able to work with either that department specifically or departments similar in these collaborative efforts. Lastly, once we have proactive cooperation, we've built that shared context, interdependence and synergy really increase. And it's in this third stage that the process of like piloting and embedding these new ways of working is really celebrated and encouraged alongside the better outcomes that are created. And so, so teammates generate new ideas together and are able to bring this needed objectivity and clarity to understand, is this the right way of working? Is this the right strategic objective to be chasing? And so you see an increase in the quality of work, but also the productivity. And Tony will touch on that in just a bit. So just taken together, when teams are continuously looking for these new ways to work together and they're achieving better outcomes, this true cross-organizational collaboration can become the norm. And at this point, teams and individuals, they feel more emboldened to embrace experimentation and to evolve what's working for them and their newfound teammates, if you will. And what's more, as more cycles of the organization sort of move through this flywheel, the organization builds the muscle to evaluate and prioritize future possibilities. I think one thing that's really important to think about is the purpose of the report isn't to say all efforts across an organization should always be cross-organizational collaborative efforts. There is a time and a place. And as individual teams work through this, the organization builds the muscle to identify which efforts are of high importance or have this broad objective that would benefit from bringing those otherwise disparate teams together to achieve a shared outcome. Just a couple of examples here. So the first one I think is really interesting of having an integrated planning process. We heard this in a couple of our interviews. And I think what this allows you to do is understand how another team might be setting their plans, their targets. And if you're coming together, you can understand, areas of gaps, areas of misalignment, and work together to create a more collaborative, but a shared plan across those groups to help, ease the process moving forward. Lastly, something we help a lot of our clients with is that very bottom one about an empowered transformation management office. And empowered is a key word there because this would be a central team that helps to integrate all of these collaborative efforts that are going on around the business around an integrated set of priorities. And so they help, ensure that each of those teams are working against something that has been prioritized by the business and have the means, the tools, and the people to achieve those goals. And so we're really excited to share, that was, very research-based and had a little bit of color from some of our individual interviews. But what we're excited to share is how it comes together in a single example. So Tony's going to walk through a story from one of our clients recently of how we moved through the flywheel together with our client in one experience. So Tony, over to you. You are on mute though.
3 years later, and I still don't know how to use Zoom. I'd like to share with you now a story of how we increase collaboration, specifically with our CVS Kidney Care client. Now, most of us in the US know CVS as this massive retail pharmacy chain, or we know their Aetna insurance business, or perhaps their Caremark pharmacy benefits management business. But several years ago, CVS set out to try to disrupt the status quo for renal care by identifying those most at risk of needing dialysis as well as helping those who do need dialysis and can be served at home to be served at home, where all the data indicates that the experience and the outcomes are dramatically better. However, their efforts at trying to do this in the first 2 years of setting up this new business unit fairly quickly fell into disconnected silos, and its growth stalled. And they're pretty off track in terms of meeting their commitments to the rest of the larger business in terms of what they needed to produce in the way of outcomes. So in 2020, Prophet was engaged by a new president for the business to partner with them and to accelerate their growth, specifically through the transformation of their organization and culture. So with that context, let's go back to our friend, the flywheel, and start with coordination. So as we just noted, this often includes establishing new norms for ways of working. And as I said, when CVS Kidney Care came to us, they were highly siloed teams. So they didn't work together across the silos. They also didn't work in the same ways. And additionally, culturally, they needed to be more like a startup that just happens to be inside one of the top 5 companies in the Fortune 500, which means that they also needed to work somewhat differently than the other business units around them. And many of their own employees have been recruited from those units. So what we did first, recognizing that there was a need to start with getting those ways of working reestablished, we brought together a cross-functional team from all the different areas of the kidney care business unit, and we helped them to collaboratively develop a set of 5 ways of working, which they aligned on, all of which coalesced into what they called their culture of courage. And the reason that this was so important for them is that shaping the fog in a business that's trying to innovate and disrupt the status quo requires a comfort with things that often don't exist in an organization of this size. So embracing ambiguity in order to accelerate the innovation, for example. It requires leading fearlessly and acting boldly as opposed to waiting for permission. It requires empowering ownership at all levels within an organization that had been, in the broader sense, outside of that business unit, extremely hierarchical. And importantly, and this was something that frames the whole story, it requires reaching across borders and acting as one team. And inculcating those new ways of working, or as they like to call them, WOWs, was critical to increasing coordination for them. That was the first step. Let's move on then to cooperation. So, as Erin noted, cooperation requires increased and conscious interdependence. At the same time, it also requires clarity and clear decision rights. With kidney care, instead of continuing with primarily functional teams, so product, operations, sales, we reorganize them into cross-disciplinary teams focused more broadly around accelerating the development of specific products and services or around specific business challenges that need to be addressed in order to resume growth. Each of the products and services pods, as we call them, tapped expertise across disciplines that we abbreviate as DERPA, meaning design, engineering, research, product or service management, and analytics and data science. And each of those teams that were focused on business challenges similarly had cross-functional groups within them who were focused on tackling those things that were not specifically product and service oriented. And each team member then had clear roles within that team based on their functional expertise, and the team as a whole had a pod leader, which was generally a product or service owner, accountable for facilitating the decision-making of that group and escalating anything that was broader than the team's remit. That got them moving in terms of cooperation. At this point, we now have new ways of working. We have a new model for organizing, get the work done. The last piece of the puzzle to get to true cross-organizational collaboration is the process for getting the work done. And in this case, we had 4-month work increments, which were then broken into 2-week sprints. And each individual sprint was bookended by planning and closeout rituals. At each one of those, they were sharing their feedback across in terms of work and process and collecting that feedback, finding other areas of synergy, and very importantly, celebrating the progress on the work as it was being done with the leaders across the business. This human-centered, if you will, approach to transformation ensured that the employees were all highly engaged and were thriving in a high velocity environment. As Aaron mentioned before, you can get a tremendous amount of work done when you're working in true mode of cross-organizational collaboration. And as a result, they were able to dramatically grow the business and put themselves back on track to meet their commitments to the larger organization. Now, we've just talked a lot about the work of the collaborating group, but I'd like to talk for a minute about leaders, because leaders play a critical role in creating an environment in which this kind of collaboration can thrive. And moving back to our study, we were very interested to note that the leaders were more optimistic in the study than those at the manager level. They saw greater value in collaboration, and they believed the organization to be more effective at collaborating than the managers. As a result, it's clear that leaders must take responsibility for championing, encouraging, and role modeling collaboration so that those managers have a reason to believe. They need to help the teams understand the why behind the collaborative effort, and they must be seen to visibly support that collaborative work, for instance, in planning and closeouts, as we just described with kidney care, and make any structural changes that might need to be made with the alignment required to get the work done, and enabling that sort of effective cross-organizational collaboration. Returning back to kidney care for a second, it was the visibility of leaders at closeouts and their deep engagement with the work as they were showing work in process that created both soft and in some ways hard incentives for colleagues to engage wholeheartedly in the work of the transformation. Stepping back into the research for a second, leaders and managers around the world in our study indicated that effective cross-organizational collaboration, like the conscious and structured effort we've just described for kidney care, leads to higher productivity and greater success at achieving those strategic organizational goals. But also importantly, from an individual perspective, employees shared that they believe that they achieve better outcomes, both personally and professionally, when they collaborate. And about half of our respondents saw value in using collaboration to help them learn new skills and gain knowledge. It also drove inclusion and enabled them to build their organizational network and profile while increasing their job satisfaction. And indeed, leaders in our study referred to, quote, the collaborative advantage that results from the trust and personal accountability that working together effectively simply brings to their experience in the work environment. And these benefits are clearly visible to the leaders through higher employee satisfaction scores and also employee retention, which obviously are critical levers in this very dynamic talent landscape that we see in the world today. So that's what we have prepared for you now. We'd like to go back and engage with you to talk a little bit about your thoughts, comments, feelings based on what you've heard. We welcome any questions you might have. And Alexis, is it possible to allow people to speak directly if they wish?
Let me look into it. If people want to raise their hand, I can give them attendees access to talk. But it looks like it's on a one-by-one basis.
Michelle has raised her hand.
Are you able to hear me? Unfortunately, I have a siren in the background.
We can hear you fine.
Okay, great. Sorry for the siren. I'm in Midtown Manhattan. So I just wanted to quickly respond to the question earlier, which was about, how being in the same room has not worked quite well over decades. And I just, my point of view about it, and would welcome your thoughts.
Please.
Sorry?
I said, please share.
Oh, Okay. I think COVID has just enabled us to stop taking what we have taken for granted in the past to do the same now. And so I'm finding that being in the same room is actually more appreciated than it was taken for granted in the past. So, I feel that can be a lever, or in looking at the hybrid workspace to balance out now, I think, again, as a result of COVID, this is my experience, the need to maybe work sometimes remotely and yet enjoy the human connection of being in the same room with people and being face to face. So I just feel the good news is I think we have more opportunities and reasons to collaborate coming organically. I just wanted to throw that out and hear what you thought.
I think you meant to collaborate face to face, perhaps. Is that what you meant?
Well, I think we are collaborating in both ways, both remotely, even you and I right now. I mean, we're not, you can't see me, but we're collaborating, or we're seeing each other right now, even remotely. But I'm finding the hybrid space to leverage the face-to-face because it's no longer just taken for granted, that it's now a human connection as opposed, and working remotely also, I can maximize its benefits, because now if I'm taking care of children or an older parent, I have the ability to balance the two. So yeah, so I think it's changed since COVID, and I was wondering what your experience was.
Well, I would ask any of my partners to opine. I will say briefly, I think that we are very good at, comparatively speaking, at face-to-face, and we're very good at all remote. And that hybrid, meaning say 50% of the people physically co-located and 50% not, is something that we're still working through. How we might be able to give complete agency to remote participants that would allow them to have the impact in the room that they would have if they were physically present. And that's part of the challenge that I think organizations are working through. I agree with what you said about people feeling drawn to have some face-to-face interaction after a period of time where it wasn't possible, and also loving the benefits of being able to be remote. So the trick is sorting out what makes hybrid work. Helen, I see you've raised your hand.
Yeah, and I was going to say that I think the challenge, if you look at the flywheel, is that some getting to true collaboration and getting comfortable with some of what needs to happen for us to actually be working at our collaborative best. Some of those activities, taking sort of challenging one another, taking tough decisions that might need to be taken, which I mentioned in the chat, I think they're so much more comfortable when you're in that kind of slightly more kind of close proximity setting. I think it's hard to be at your best potentially on some of what needs to happen when, half people are in the room and half people are not. So I do think, and that's what I think why an awful lot of organizations are saying we really need to think about how we are more deliberate about bringing people together to actually achieve what we would feel is more like true collaboration, as opposed to, we're cooperating, which I think is kind of what we've learned to do through the last couple of years. I think that for me is the challenge, that we talk about collaboration, but we don't always describe, or we're not always pushing to actually achieve what's at the top of this flywheel. And then those questions about how you do that and how you really build the consistency and muscle of that, I think we've just not worked out the format and the environment to really achieve that to best effect within. So I think we're in a bit of a spin with our flywheel, if you'll excuse the pun, at this moment in time. But I still think that's also caught up in mixed definitions. We use the word collaboration, but I'm not sure we're using the word collaboration properly if that's we want to be at the top of this flywheel.
I see that we have a question from Clinton Gary, one of my correspondents on LinkedIn, asking, are collaboration initiatives originating more from top-down executive boards or bottom-up / business line as one easier to gain momentum? And Clinton, you have talking access if you'd like to speak after I offer first stab at answering your question. So what I would say is we see collaboration initiatives happening at the functional level with a leader deciding that, for instance, enterprise marketing wants to get better at it. We also see that within transformation initiatives, which necessarily are top-down and CEO and board driven, that collaboration is a key component, like the business unit one I just described for kidney care, and it's part and parcel of what needs to happen for the transformation as a whole to work. How does that sit with you?
Tony, thank you so much for answering that question. I appreciate it. And recognizing we had great collaboration on LinkedIn. I was curious to see if business leaders felt like at the business unit level, felt like they were empowered to be able to take on a collaboration initiative within their own business line, or did they feel like they needed a higher level top down to be able to really bust through strong barriers that are organization wide?
I don't think we can answer that directly from the data, but I will defer to Erin and Christine on that.
I was going to go anecdotal because our data doesn't have exactly that, but I will share in conversations with clients, and we've had a couple one-on-one, share outs of this data, and we've gotten to a similar question before actually. And what I think I'm sort of taking as a trend is it's not so much that the functional leaders need the permission from executives to take one on. I think most functional leaders tend to feel empowered to try a way of working. However, if or when the executives are not on board and they're not, playing ball, if you will, then the collaborative effort sort of stops in its tracks. So you don't necessarily need permission from executives, but they need to at least allow it and create some of the space for the functions to try a way of working that may at first be a little clunky before you work your way through and build some of that momentum. So maybe not a prerequisite, but eventually needs to have enough executive sponsorship that employees are able to connect and collaborate in that way.
Yeah, and the only thing I would add is, and we did see this in the data, at the foundation of any kind of behavior inside a business is the incentive structure. So is there something embedded in the incentive structure that will allow a bottoms up or motivate, let's say motivate a bottoms up initiative? And that of course has to originate from the top down to set that incentive structure in the first place. Some language around incentives, mutual accountability, setting goals that require multidisciplinary participation. You're not going to get it done unless you collaborate. Once that's established, then a lot of different activity can form from the bottoms up as people start to realize, okay, in order for me to reach the goal that has been set, I will need to pull a multidisciplinary team together. So there's the top-down way in, the incentive in place, and then the bottoms up realization that, whoa, I've got to do it in order to get it done. So I think that dynamic has to be in place. That makes sense.
I would just add one more perspective, which is I'd say no matter where the impetus for the collaborative effort originates, we definitely learned in our qualitative research the power of a really visible leadership team that role models and sets that signal for the collaboration to come. So whether that looks like a cross-functional leadership group that mirrors the cross-functional composition of those who are kind of actively working in the day-to-day effort, showing up as one team, committing to shared goals, that goes a huge way in terms of setting that example for those who are working in the teams, all the way to some organizations actually saying, in order to break down kind of the deeply held silos that exist within the organization, we're going to move a leader who's been in this part of the organization and has, their fiefdom around them, move them into an entirely different role to kind of shake things up and really set the precedent for new ways of working and crossing lines in the organization that may not have before.
So with that, we'd love to thank you very much for spending this time with us. It's been our pleasure to be with you. We'd love to hear from you. Please feel free to reach out to us. And until then, we'll see you on the next webinar. Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Take care. Bye.
Bye-bye.